Tahoe just so they could have a place to play. Fredo Corleone is in the middle of Lake Tahoe. I mean, it's really cool here. And if you get the right tour guide, if you go on one of the bike tours or any of the tours, you get the right tour guide, they'll tell you where the bodies are buried. I mean, it's really cool around here. You've got to enjoy Tahoe. In addition to it being beautiful and all that nature stuff, it's where the bodies are buried. So that's really cool. For those of you who are, I think most of you are familiar with MediaPost, we are celebrating our 20th anniversary of journalism, covering the rise of digital media and the way it's impacted marketing and media. For the last 15 years, we've been hosting events like these as an extension of that journalism. And part of our job here is to contextualize that digital revolution. One of the things that we've been doing in the first 10 years of our events, we tended to focus on the platforms. We tended to focus on video, social, mobile, all those things, those technologies and platforms that were really driving innovation and different ways of interacting with media and buying media. But over time, one of the things that became, I think, increasingly apparent to everyone is that digital and data tended to have an inherent performance bias. And one of the questions that emerged that we wanted to engage in this series of summits, and especially at this one here, is whither branding. In a data-driven and digital realm where the bias tends to bend towards performance, towards what's measurable, towards demonstrable ROI, what happens to the big brands? What happens to the idea of branding and making a brand identity in this universe? How do you do it? How do you measure it? And it's an important point because we know how to convert, but we don't necessarily know how to convert. And what I mean by that is we know how to convert in the small sense of moving people through a funnel, but are we really converting people to brands so that they understand brands? These are the latest numbers from Havas's annual Meaningful Brands study. Most people would not care if 74% of the brands that they use every day disappeared. And it means that in most consumers' minds, brands are interchangeable. They're disposable. They know there's another one coming along. It's like Facebook's attitude towards content. We don't need your content. We know that somebody else is going to do it for us. And that most categories are commoditized, at least in most consumers' minds. And also this idea that most consumers don't feel that most brands really are integral to their lives, that they add a quality to their life. So there's a real challenge here. Few brands really seem to have an identity. Now this comes from a recent study that Morning Consult did of millennials and their top brands. And you get a sense from the ones that they have the most favorability towards of the ways in which brands are building identity and how they've woven into people's lives. Look at these brands that the millennials identify with the most favorability. They're ever present in their lives. They have reliable service. They provide a reliable service or a pleasure. And in many cases, they've distinguished themselves with some sort of unique customer-focused attribute. And this is hard to see. By the way, all these slides will be online later, so you can pick them up and look at them. But this also is from the Morning Consult poll. And really, I think what it conveys is building a brand, or at least getting into consumers' heads, minds, lives, and hearts, is really not rocket science. In fact, it hasn't changed that much. Again, this is a poll of millennials, and the kinds of words that they associate, for instance, with the brands that they love. And on the other side, the set of qualities that they associate with the brands that they love. And it really comes down to some pretty basic, fundamental, and perennial ideas. Decent value and quality is always there. Fair dealing and responsiveness with customers, and even also with employees, something that's especially valuable, it appears, to millennials. And it doesn't seem like this should be a hard target, but in fact it is. The ANA recently argued that of the Fortune 500 companies, more than half have actually seen their revenues decline at the same time that their media spend has gone up. So there's a real major disconnect here, and that's part of the problem that we're trying to engage. In this event and throughout a lot of our journalism and a lot of our events over the next year is how brands build identities and weave themselves into people's lives. We're seeing some success stories. We're going to talk about that today and throughout the next 3 days. But let's start with a little poll I did of many of you that I sent out a few days ago, asking to set the table with some of the attitudes that you're bringing to this event. Because after all, this this is a conversational event, as you'll see. It really has to do with the ways in which you, as marketers, are talking with one another. So I wanted to start that conversation really with your voices. So I polled all of you and asked a whole series of questions. And these are just some comments that we that got back on, some basic questions about how your media allocation has changed in the last year. And these are just a collection of comments. I put them together very quickly the other night as they were coming in. And again, I'll put them online so you can see. But you get a sense of how a range of different attitudes that people have towards media allocation. Some here have said they're moving aggressively towards digital platforms, more towards video and studio. A number of people who are coming mentioned this increasing investment into performance-based media and the ways in which digital is really forcing them towards accountable models in almost everything. This is an interesting quote. We've actually shifted all of our marketing dollars that were spent on traditional media over to digital. Everything we're doing now needs to be able to prove ROI. So the only way to do that is to move it to the digital space and track from the click to the order confirmation. And that's sort of what digital has done. But again, it still leaves the question, where does branding fit in? Where do we value branding? Where do we do it? How do we do it? And again, some more comments about it, moving towards paid social media, specifically Facebook and Instagram. My next question was about bringing things in-house. This has been a big topic over the last couple of years of how much, as these digital tools become more accessible, as the major platforms, one good byproduct of the oligopoly for a lot of media buyers is that it's sort of simplified the market for them. It's made accessible a set of tools they feel they can bring more in-house. So I asked this question about how many of you really are bringing things in-house. A number of you said no, that you're still trusting your agencies to get the scale. And also trusting the agencies to give you expertise. But then, on the other side, we also have others. Even I can't read this. We move a bit, and this is, I think the first comment is a very common one that I hear when I talk to a lot of brands, is the brand moves too quickly for the agencies to keep up, and they have a better hold both on their customers and on their brand identity. And it is something that almost everybody is considering. Now, one of the things that I did with this event in particular, and you'll be hearing them over the next few days, and this morning we have a panel devoted to it, is the rise of the direct-to-consumer brands. Those brands that just in the last few years have built brand identity using almost exclusively digital media, although a number of them are starting now to buy TV, and that itself is an interesting development. But what all of us can learn from what's happened over the last few years in D2C brand building. Since a lot of it is being done through performance channels. So I asked all of you to reflect a bit on what you'd like to hear from these guys, as they're not only going to be on stage later this morning, but they're also going to be in the roundtables throughout the next few days. And these are the things that a number of you, most who answered this question were coming from the more legacy brands. How do they stay competitive as consumers' expectations evolve? Scaling, of course, is probably the central question that always comes up for the D2Cs. Can this really scale once it starts moving beyond its sort of grassroots beginnings? How do we continue evolving to break through the clutter of the constant barrage of messaging that consumers receive on a daily basis? This is an interesting irony that I noted as I was putting together this event. We're going to hear on Wednesday from John Strum from Georgia Pacific about a great transformation that company did in which it winnowed down brands, and there was a rationale behind that, and it has to do with clutter and the ways in which people shop and discover brands online. And this runs counter to this explosion of brands that we've been seeing in digital. And there is a real question whether all of us as consumers can handle this clutter, whether any one of them can scale appropriately because there simply are so many. What are the new trends in consumer behaviors? This is one of the things I think the D2Cs are especially good at, is they have a very tight and close understanding of their consumer, their path to purchase, how many touches it really takes to move them down the funnel. We'll be hearing some of that I think from some of the people who will be on stage both presenting and in panels. What's working? Are there breakthrough tactics that are working? How are they scaling their digital operations? How are they using content to create consumer engagement? This is one of the interesting things about a number of the D2Cs. A lot of them are high-touch items, like mattress companies, for instance. So content and the long sell really takes an important part to this. The ways in which they've developed content and used data to drive the use of that content across down through the funnel is a really interesting phenomenon. And then I ask, a general question that I ask, and maybe this is my media bias because we're concerned about the oligopoly, is how advertisers regard the fact that we see so much media spend going to 2 or 3 players, and specifically Amazon, Facebook, and Google, and whether this impacts them. This is interesting because I asked this question over the last couple of years, and it has evolved somewhat. When I first asked this question, almost everybody said, nah, it doesn't matter to us, it just makes it easier. But it actually has started to, as you'll see in some of these comments, you'll see that in some of these, some of the responses, there is increasing worry about escalating prices, about a lack of service among the platforms, and whether advertisers really should be starting to look elsewhere to build scale. There are a number of companies that I do and brands that I talk to who are bringing things in-house more, who actually are trying to create a scale that they within their category that they are using to try to leverage against some of the platforms. And again, a lot of this has to do with pricing. Having power in a few companies can be a negative as they own the digital advertising channels, making it difficult for smaller advertisers with less budget to compete in search, shopping, paid social, et cetera. This might have an impact ultimately on the D2C market as well, since a lot of those companies are coming in with bootstrap funding. And then I asked just a general question about the biggest challenges that you're all facing, especially as you're looking to build brands across channels. And these have been fairly consistent, although the one thing popped this time as opposed to previous ones. Internal silos, a perennial problem. Almost all the legacy brands have this problem of how they're standardizing data across the silos, how they're getting the silos to talk to one another, how they're incentivizing across the silos. But also, this is another one that came up, that sort of came up more this time, which is consistency. How we talk in the same language across the different channels so that people have a more coherent view of who we are. And actually, there are a couple of presentations today, over the next few days, that are actually going to address that. And again, consistency of experiences. Attribution, a perpetual problem of how we actually measure effectiveness across these channels. And creating a customer journey across all the marketing channels, which again is a kind of a question of consistency. So I just wanted to throw those out there to get a sense of, to put the voices out there of your fellow marketers who are here. And I do want to say just one thing about the nature of the conversation at these summits. We design these things to be different. We keep them small, as you can see, and the idea is the magic comes from keeping it intimate. You all get to know and meet one another over several days. You have conversations across the arc of the content that we're creating here. Of special importance, I think, is the end of morning roundtables. And just to clarify how we all work this journalistically, everything on stage here is being live streamed now over MediaPost.com. If you have any colleagues back at the office, you want to ping, have them tune in, they can. We'll also be posting the videos, usually by the end of the day, back at the same agenda for the event, so you can see everything and rerun it and share it with people from there. It's all on the record. We'll be reporting on it. It'll stay in the archives at MediaPost.com, accessible for all, and we'll be reusing it at various points. At noon, though, or at noon or 12:15, when we move to roundtables, everything else is off the record. And so there are journalists here, Nina Lentini, who is our editor of events here. Me, I'm a writer and editor as well. We won't quote you, we won't report on anything you say unless you gave us explicit permission to do so. So everything on stage is on the record, everything off stage is off the record, including the important roundtables. The roundtables really are critical here. They're really the heart of the summit. I urge you all, at noon, don't run out and make your phone calls. spend time, the 45 minutes or an hour, with your colleagues in the round tables. They really are the heart of this. It's where the content on stage becomes conversations. And to start the conversation today, I want to start with a great story of brand evolution. One of the great successes in branding over the last 10 years has been Aflac. It has created an icon that we all know. It's created a category that many of us didn't even know existed before, and has brought it into consumer consciousness, whereas before it was exclusively a B2B affair. But now,